My name is Brian Miller. I am the Educator Community Manager at Wonder Workshop, and welcome to our monthly edweb.net webinar that we host, sponsored by Wonder Workshop. And we're really excited to be here with not only two great friends of mine, but also two incredible colleagues in the educational space, Dr. Jennifer Williams and Dr. Fran Kusa. Fran, I gave you a doctorate without even knowing it. Both co-founders from Calliope Global. So really excited to have them here with us today. And we're going to learn about them in a moment. For attending today, you're all going to be receiving a continuing education certificate. So if you're logged in live with your email, your certificate will be emailed to you tomorrow, the next business day. And if you join by phone or if you're watching this as a recording, you can take the continuing education quiz located in the webinar archives. So to take the quiz, you can go to edweb.net/code, and that's for people who are watching this recording back. But for all of you attending live, you're going to be getting your continuing education credits. Also, if you're really interested in continuing learning about what we do here at Wonder Workshop and other parts about coding and robotics in the K-8 field, you can join our community that we actually host and we manage, which is edweb.net/code. There's lots of great resources, there's lots of conversations, and all of the upcoming webinar information will be posted there as well, as also with our recordings also, so you can be sure to check that out. So we're really excited to talk today about a topic that has come up a lot as I'm out speaking to different schools at different conferences about infusing computer science into your classroom. And that's learning space design and how we can better do that. So I figured let's reach out to two incredible educators who have done a lot of work around learning spaces, Dr. Jennifer Williams and Fran Kusa, who are really well versed in doing this and talking about best practices for learning spaces. This webinar is being presented by Wonder Workshop in conjunction with Calliope Global. So be sure to check out makewonder.com for information on Dash and Dot, and Calliope Global to learn more about Fran and Jen and what they're up to and what they're doing and how they're impacting the world. So a little bit about myself as your host for today. I've been an educator for 15 years. I've worked in higher education. I've been a kindergarten teacher, a K-5 computer teacher, and director of educational technology at one of the largest private schools in the United States. I'm an international keynoter and presenter and travel the world speaking to schools about the importance of and how to integrate computer science and robotics into the core curriculum, along with technology and connected toys and play. You can follow me on Twitter by adding me at EdTechNerd. Our first presenter today is Jennifer Williams. She's the co-founder of Calliope Global. Jennifer Williams is a globally minded educator that works with classrooms of the world to connect learning and experience through meaningful uses of technology. She's a professor and literacy specialist and serves on the board of directors for the International Literacy Association. Recognized as a transformational leader in education, Jennifer empowers teachers and students to explore together as digital composers in a common learning spaces. Jennifer speaks, writes, and consults on practices that develop global perspectives and support social good, and her research interests include multimodal literacy and digital technologies, equity and diversity in education, and student-centered pedagogies. In 2016, Jennifer was named number 33 of the 200 top educational influencers by Onalytica, based on her work in education and educational technology. Our other presenter is Fran Kusa. She's also the co-founder of Calliope Global. And Fran is a classroom Spanish teacher, has been a classroom Spanish teacher for over 20 years, earned her master's in education in educational technology in 2012. Currently, as the co-founder of Calliope Global, she supports educational teams in meeting the diverse needs of today's students who will be well-equipped players in the global and creative workforce of the future. Her passions are student-centered learning, global projects, world language study, sustainable development, and social good. Having managed a one-to-one middle school iPad program as an early adopter, Fran creates unique opportunities for teachers and students to develop a culture of innovation through the incorporation of digital technologies and sustainable global partnerships. So thank you guys both for being here today.
Thanks for having us. What a lovely introduction. You covered it all. That's fantastic.
I tried to be as thorough as possible for both of you, but I figured, you know, as you're here and taking the time out of your busy schedules to be a part of what we're doing, we want to make sure that everyone knows who you are as well and the expertise that you both have in this area. So once again, I just want to thank you both very much for being a part of this and helping, share your knowledge to our group of 147 and growing attendees live in our session right now.
Oh, that's fantastic. We are absolutely honored and thrilled to see all these great educators. Both, the three of us are here in Florida, different parts of Florida, but seeing educators from across the country and, as you said, across the world. That's just fantastic and a big passion of ours, connecting teachers from all countries, all locations, and excited that this models that with professional learning and growth. So thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you. So just a little bit of a background. So Jen, Fran, and I are old friends. We've known each other for, probably the last 7 years now, maybe, right? At least. And, we've been connected in the South Florida education space for quite some time, and we've continued to grow in our fields and have had the opportunities to present together and do a lot of work together as the three of us. So just continuing that tradition by getting them to join us in our EdWeb webinars that we host and using their knowledge to share with the world. So once again, thank you guys very much, and thank you for being such great friends and be willing to join us today.
Thank you.
So to get started, one of the first questions that I always want to start with is the question, why computer science? And as we are continuing to model best practices for students in schools, find new innovative ways of teaching, computer science is that question that is always asked as to why. Why do we need this? There's a lot of resources and a lot of information that's been shared. We've done other webinars in the past. In December, we did a great one with code.org where they partnered with us, and we talked along this subject. So if you're interested in learning even more why computer science, you can go back and watch that webinar. But the question that is always asked is why? And my answer to why computer science is because it's preparing students for tomorrow. It's preparing them for a job or a set of jobs that have not yet been created. It's preparing them to solve problems that we have not yet experienced. It's done through a number of different ways: critical thinking, collaboration, communication, problem solving. All of these different skills are these 21st century skills that we often talk about. And computer science does a really great job in teaching all of those skills effectively. So when it comes to the why question, the easiest answer that I like to provide educators is because it's something that students are interested in and engaged in, and it's going to help them learn beyond how they're already learning. So one of the things that we like to do is we like to learn to code, and then we take that knowledge and we code to learn. We are able to continue learning through the ability of computer science and coding by applying it to our everyday lives. And computer science fits in everywhere, and it's something that we're going to continue to see grow in the job market, in the economy. This is going to be a differentiator for our country. The more students and children that we have understanding this and being able to be prepared for when they move into the real world. And it also engages them. So we see engagement for students go up dramatically as they are learning computer science. And we know not every child is going to be a computer scientist. However, we want to expose them to the skill set so they can begin to learn how to think differently and think along the lines of a computer scientist. And how Dash and Dot fit into that. So Dash and Dot are robots that teach children to code. Our age group that we focus on is kindergarten through 5th grade. However, it does extend beyond that. And it teaches the early foundations of computer science and coding. It teaches children how to navigate a digital space in a physical world. So they're able to use their tablets to navigate moving Dash around in a physical environment, using Dot to actually move, or to be Dot to be shaken and played with in order to have different triggers happen. And if you're not familiar with the robots, I have both of them right back here with me. So we have Dash that's located here, and we have Dot, the handheld counterpart. And both of them together can interact with each other. They can play. So lots of information about Dash and Dot can be found on makewonder.com. But if you're looking for a way to engage students and get them excited about computer science and coding in a tangible form and gets them to move beyond the screen. Dash and Dot are wonderful resources for that. So we highly encourage you to learn a little bit more by visiting makewonder.com. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and pass this off to Jen and Fran, and let me know, you two, as you would like me to advance the slides, just because I'm the one that's in control over here right now because of the Amazon Web Services outage. So just let me know, and I can advance when you guys are ready. So I'll let you go ahead and take this.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian, and thanks for helping us with slides. We will definitely let you know. So when Brian invited us to join for this webinar today, we were absolutely thrilled because as we've seen, definitely bringing Dash and Dot into the classrooms that we're working with and the benefits of computer science and coding and programming and all of these great things, we also have found in our area of expertise with learning space design and also global collaboration that it all works together. And one can't exist without the other, truly. So looking at all these different parts, finding the ways they can work together to support learning, to support students, that was quite exciting for us, and we were thrilled to be able to join. So again, thanks for having us. And today we're really here just to share on some of our experiences and what we've learned in our 20 years each of teaching. We've been in the classroom, we've worked in admin, now we're working in higher ed and supporting teachers. So all different levels. And really today though, it's to focus on computer science initiatives and innovations in our school and how can that be supported with space. For us, we've seen how environment, and described as classroom, or it can be described as learning space, or we see it truly as environment, is key to advancing both instruction and learning in these exemplar programs that we have the privilege to go out and visit and work in. So for us, it's a very intentional process, and one where we always look when we're designing or redesigning spaces to keep the student at the center of it all, always. So how can we do that successfully and efficiently? Because these processes are happening quickly, and schools are needing quick results and answers. So just to kind of give you a background on how we got interested in learning space design and environment is it kind of stems from our early work in Montessori classrooms. And if you've ever been in a Montessori classroom or if you've worked in a Montessori school, you'll know that the classrooms are very rich with Montessori materials, and the space itself becomes almost the instructor, where the teacher goes into the background and becomes a facilitator of learning, and the space itself is where the learning is transformed. So today we look to support schools and districts that are looking to transform their instruction through space design, and we try to bring in as many of those pedagogical and design elements from our Montessori roots. You can go ahead and advance the slide, Brian, that'd be great. So, and it's great that you brought up the why too, because we're always looking to the why. And over the past 6 to 8 years, since we've had this growing interest in learning space and environment design, it's been interesting and exciting for us because our conversations with teachers have drastically shifted. So years ago, when we would go in and approach conversations on learning space design, we were really at entry-level conversations with teachers. And so we were talking a lot about the why. Like, why do we need to even consider redesigning spaces? So now, though, we're kind of moving on from that because teachers that we're talking to, they get the why. They're like, okay, we know we need to move from rows of desks, and we know we need to infuse computer science into all spaces, but now are more of the how. How can we do this? So we just feel very fortunate to work with these teachers, and we also work with different educational furniture companies that they're very purposeful also in what they're doing in their work. So they're bringing a lot of research, a lot of foundational elements to space design, which is important for us because when we're making these decisions, it's this backward design. It's not anything frivolous. We want it to be very grounded empirically and focused on what's best for kids. So just to kind of frame what we're looking at today and how we can create thinking-rich spaces where knowledge is constructed. And you can, on your end, kind of think of our discussion centering more on design as opposed to decor. So we're not going to talk about, what you can bring in to decorate your classroom. That's an entirely different discussion. And this is really more of design and thinking a lot on essential questions that you can be asking in your schools and with your teams. Next slide would be great. Thank you. So probably a lot of you are today. We saw where you guys were all coming here, joining us from different states and different countries, but probably you're coming in from a lot of different roles as well. So I'll make the assumption that we have classroom teachers, we have tech directors, we have administrators, parents, all coming here, different backgrounds, and wanting to learn more. So why all of a sudden are tech directors and admins interested in learning space design? Because these weren't typically topics that these professionals were looking at before. But what we see is they're interested because they're following the needs of the students that they serve. And they're seeing that learners today, their needs are changing. And in essence, then the needs of the space are changing. So a couple main reasons for that we've seen really over the last 5 years, but more so over the 10. And Brian, I know you've seen that as you've gone out to schools. But so in the past recent years, there's been a great emphasis on getting devices into schools, which has been fantastic. So all of these initiatives, BYOD and one-to-one and CART programs, so they've brought this influx of devices into our schools. So that's kind of been the focus. A lot of initiatives have focused on that first. And so what we're seeing is the traditional rows in these traditional classrooms no longer are that match anymore for these type of initiatives. So a lot of times we're seeing people starting to question that and saying, okay, so we have our devices, we have our computer science curriculum that we're ready to go with. How can we now look at space? So we're seeing instructional focus also shifting from consumption of information, and these are kind of theoretical, pedagogical type of things, but we're seeing that. And so it's shifting from this consumption of information to now our students are creating and they're designing and they're having these high-level conversations around learning. So they're needing to work collaboratively. They're needing to find ways to share content on the web. And so with the shift too, we're also seeing increased presence of virtual classes and blended learning. Like I know as a parent too, which is great for me because I'm able to kind of get an insider view from a different point of view. My oldest son, he has to take virtual classes. Like it is a requirement for him to graduate now. So these are part of school that we're seeing that we're having to respond to. Okay, let's see.
Jen, let me ask a question real quick. So because we are bringing in, these new technologies and we're moving away from, in many cases, the size of our devices are getting smaller, but what we're seeing is the size that was originally taking up space, the footprint of that device is being swapped out with something different. It's being replaced now with, we may be using a phone, but we now have robots that are freely roaming the floor. So how do we work that in? Because, the devices are changing, but also the needs for space, as it says in here, are changing as well. So what are some things that, teachers can do to plan for that? Because when they're originally set up in a classroom, they're not thinking along those lines, and then they're provided these different new resources that may range in size from small to large. So how can they prepare for that better?
Okay, so that's a great question. And what we always try to do with any decision we're making, be it design or curricular, is we work with our end goal. And so with this, an example we had is we were in this very situation you just described. So we had desktops, and we had rooms full of desktops in our school, which met our needs at the time, and it was great for learning. So it wasn't a bad thing, and we still need those in our classroom. So but we were early adopters of iPads. So we went one-to-one, and we went in blind. Like, we were like, oh my goodness, we have no guidance on this. We were just handed boxes of iPads and press go. And so, we learned a lot. We made a lot of mistakes, and we moved forward. But now I think teachers are in a situation where they can be more purposeful and intentional. So end goal, where do you want to be when you're making these decisions? And things such as, you're going to be integrating BYOD, where students are using mobile devices. They could be using their phones or their tablets, or maybe they have Chromebooks. Knowing which devices you're having, and how can you support that with your classroom space design. Are tables the best choice for furniture? Low seating, high seating. If you're talking about some robotics components and maker components that you might want to embed, so having those spaces available. Easiest thing that we see teachers do is draw out the layout of your classroom and then just start playing around. And bringing the students into that process can be really eye-opening, and asking them. So what we did with our students, and it was really fun for us, and we had the privilege of moving into an entirely new building that was being built for us. So that's not going to always be the case for everyone, but we were able to talk to our middle school students and say, well, if you could have anything, what would you want? And of course, the number one thing they wanted couches. They wanted to be comfortable. And this was way back when flexible seating wasn't all the buzz. So now we're seeing classrooms bring in flexible seating and options for students that are supportive of them as they're in these different postures and seating. Because sitting upright with a keyboard is going to be very different than sitting comfortably with a tablet. So that would be our best advice for that. And we'll kind of go into some other specific ideas on space design when people are making decisions. I think on our next slide, which we're ready for that whenever you are, Bri. Okay, good. So before we get to those tips, this is kind of for us also beyond the how and the why. We're wanting to bring it back to the students. So how are our students coming to us when they come to our spaces? And that's really important to consider, because our environments are impacting our students' learning, and that we need to be quite aware of that. So how are we looking to redesign spaces for our students? And for with a capital F, because we really need to focus on what is best for them as they're going through their years with us in our rooms. So the first thing to consider is that learning takes place in a physical environment, which sounds so logical, but sometimes I think as teachers, we may forget that. So our students enter our rooms and they are bombarded with information and sensory information. So things that we can think about, and it's really important with computer science because they're looking at screens. We need to have proper lighting. So things such as lighting and temperature and all of these other things, noise levels. Are they wearing headphones or earbuds? Like, all of these things we want to take into account when we're designing our learning space plans, because they can either encourage learning or they can really detract from it. And so we want to do as much as we can to support them. The second point here is that this is a very, very active process, and computer science and where we're moving in education is supportive of this process being active rather than passive. So students are participating. They're looking, they're feeling, they're listening, they're moving. We want to encourage that. We want to use these brain-based strategies that we can when possible in our classrooms. Then the third thing is the physical environment affects emotional response. So you can, and I probably, when I say that, you as a teacher can even think to classrooms that you've been in and you're like, whoo, I walk in that room and it's overstimulating. And for whatever reason, and everyone's going to be different. Is it too noisy? Is it too vibrant? What could that be? And so we need to keep looking back at our students. Like, different years, we're going to have different students. So there's the overstimulation point, but then there's also the understimulation point. So we don't want them to be so comfortable and passive that they're not ready for learning. So we're seeking that balance in that learning zone for our students. All right, we're ready for our next slide.
Should be coming. There we go.
It's there. Okay, so we're back to our question, and here we've highlighted the how. So one thing that we never do is we never offer a one-size plan that really becomes a shopping list of items, because we get that asked that a lot. Like, okay, just give me the list of items. I'll go buy all that furniture, and we're going to be set. Our kids are going to be learning. We're going to have computer science integrated, all is well. But as we know, there's never going to be that one-size-fit plan that is going to be perfect for everyone. So it's going to be really a customized type of personalized experience dependent on all of your own students. But our focus really is to aim and offer ideas on pedagogy and frameworks that can guide and inspire questions that you may have as your team is setting out on your space design. So that's kind of where we're going to jump in with tips for you for today. All right, we're ready for the next slide. Okay, so now we're ready. So we have our framework, we have our foundation, we understand why and where we need to go. How are we going to get there? So as you can see here, we've highlighted into. So infusing computer science into classrooms. Computer science, as we know, and I know, Brian, you're a big proponent of this, all content areas, all grade levels, our youngest students, all the way up to us as teachers, as learners too. So how can we put this into every area as much as we possibly can? So we have 4 tips here today that we can offer to you to kind of harness the power of technology and support students in engagement and in creativity. And so the first one we have here is to define learning zones. So as we said in the beginning, integration of devices has really shifted learning and teaching from the front of the room to all areas of the room, kind of back to the point you were saying, Brian, and the needs are changing in classrooms. So teachers no longer are tethered to podiums or overhead projectors, though we sometimes see those in some classes we visit, or desktop computers. And now teachers are actually infused into the classroom. So they're becoming participants in learning, everyone teaching, everyone learning, all part of the conversation. So how can we then design learning zones? So one key question to ask here when you're looking to define your learning zones is how can you match learning workspaces to learning goals? So what are your learning goals? And then should emphasis be placed on furniture like chairs and tables that are movable, like we were talking about before, or perhaps you have students that some are working in areas with direct instruction, more lecture style, some might be working collaboratively in small groups, and you may have some students that need to work independently on individual projects. So in that case, should you invest in things like movable screens so you can section off and divide rooms into spaces where they can work effectively. That's going to be another thing with the sounds, like we talked about with the sensory. So you're going to kind of want to cut out some of that sound so students can focus and learn. And that's a good tip for any level, youngest to oldest, being able to give them flexibility and options and choices in their space when they're making their decisions on where they want to be. And you notice I say where they want to be, so giving them that control back so they can make those decisions in their learning.
So Jane, let me ask real quick. So someone made a comment about the picture that you chose. Now I know why you chose this picture, but maybe other people just by looking at it can't quite understand what the furniture is that allows for defining learning zones and mobility and writing surfaces. So can you explain the reason for the picture? Because for some people who may be looking at it firsthand without realizing where this is taken, I know exactly where this is taken. And I know what the furniture can do, but it may be confusing because it doesn't really show that to them. So can you explain a little bit about the capabilities of some of this furniture and how, it can work in this space?
That's a wonderful point. Yes, and I'd love to. And Brian's saying that he knows this space because this is actually my classroom at my university. So this is a classroom for College of Education students. So this space is used by many different professors. It's not just my space. So you don't see things hung on the wall that are specific to me. But if you could see the entire space, so a couple of things I'm going to point out. The first thing is natural lighting. You see the windows. Those are also writable surfaces. I have a shade that I can push with a button, and the shade will go up and down. These tables are on casters, so they have wheels. So every day when I would go into my classrooms last semester, that formation would be different. I'd maybe set them in a U shape. So if we were doing a Google Hangout with someone like Brian, and he's an expert that's coming into our classroom, maybe not able to join us on site, so we're doing a Google Hangout, then I would have it perhaps in a U shape. This formation is set up for group work. We did a lot of group work. And then you can see that I have whiteboards all the way around. And on another wall, I had a full wall of screens, quite large. But my students were using individual devices. So we had class sets of MacBooks, class sets of iPads, but they really, even though we had those, they chose to use their own devices. So the chairs also, of course, are on wheels, so those were moving. So we sometimes even move them throughout the session. So if we had a 1 hour or 2 hour block, we were going to be moving and shifting according to whatever our learning needs are. Does that answer if the person wants to write in the chat box, if they have more questions on that?
They're wondering if there are whiteboards on each table, and I'm moving the arrow, and hopefully you can see the arrow where I'm pointing. Those are whiteboards that hang at the end of the tables. But then also, can you talk a little bit about just even writing on the surface?
Yeah, so, and that's our tip number 3 is really making thinking visible with writing surfaces. And this is important specifically with computer science because what we've seen is we need to keep the conversation going with our kids. And even though they're heads down on devices sometimes, we need to make sure we're still working together and solving problems of the world, which Fran's going to be talking on in a minute. But my classroom, I teach literacy. So we're talking about communication constantly. We're doing research on devices, and then we're making that visible for discussion. So as Brian pointed out, in the hanging on the tables, on all of them, they're there, but you can't see them. But in the back, you can. There's wipe-off boards hanging. So they had access to those. And what the thing in the middle of the tables, that's where they would put their markers. So the tables were quite conducive to that. And we were up moving. We used Post-it notes a lot. And I'm trying to, so for me, it's a little different because I'm trying to model these teaching practices because these are our future teachers going out into classrooms. But Fran works with a lot of middle school students, and so she's using these same kind of best practices with her kids. So we use a lot of design thinking, which is modeled after the engineering process. So ideation to prototyping to iterating to launching of ideas, which really syncs nicely with computer science and programming and coding. So
absolutely, these tips fit perfectly into a computer science infused classroom because Space, so defining your learning zone with, having robots or with computer science tools and makerspace tools. You have to set them up in different areas throughout the classroom that students are able to move into. So you can define that space by just grouping tables a little bit differently or having space that's kind of taped out or laid out on the floor. And the mobility part is huge as well, because there may be a day where the students are working on their devices exclusively, but then you introduce something like robots into the classroom where they need space so the desks can be moved and pushed away to the outside to allow a larger open space in the middle, or a 5x5 space that students can work out of on the floor, and setting those up and using the mobility of the furniture and defining learning zones to create those spaces. So these are great tips, and this is exactly how a computer science infused classroom should look.
One other thing too, Brian, is Fran and I are really, really cognizant about realities also. So we're going out constantly into schools, and they're not going to be necessarily equipped like this. So they may not have, we go into some schools, they have no technology. I was in classrooms last week, and the only thing that they had, the teacher had a phone. And so she was trying to find her own personal phone was the only technology they had in their room. So we try to find workarounds. And so you're talking about things like writing spaces, and almost all classes, students can write directly on their tables or their desks. Those are washable surfaces, as long as you're not using, of course, permanent markers. I've seen teachers also, they will laminate plain colored cardstock, and that becomes a writable surface for students. So you can do these things for next to nothing. It's really, and it kind of goes along with that backwards design. If you want, you're saying, okay, I am dedicated to making visible thinking in my classroom, and I may not have the budget for that. What are some other options? And there's so many great resources on the internet and on Twitter. So I would also encourage anyone interested. Of course, you can reach out to us, and Brian has great ideas as well. But there's some really, really cool things out there right now where you can find good resources just to be, creative ideas that you can embed into your classroom the next day. So definitely looking for that. Were there any other questions you saw, Brian, as you were going through? I just want to make sure that's definitely our goal, is to make sure we meet the needs of the people that are here today.
Not yet. So if you have questions, feel free to throw them into the chat room so we can pull them out live, or when we get to the end, we can address them during our Q&A session.
I think we've really covered tip 1 and 2 and 3. I want to point out on tip 4, and this is another one that is really important to us and important to a lot of teachers that we work with, is that digital and analog harmony. So, and you talk about this often too, Brian, and so we have a lot, as teachers, we have a lot of tools that are coming at us. And sometimes it's hard to navigate through and say, all right, which one's best? Which one's best for my students? And so finding ways to bring in those digital tools in a very intentional way, and connecting them still to our hands-on analog resources. So finding ways to do that efficiently, and pairing those up so our students can work in virtual environments, and they can work in our physical environments, and the two can kind of work in parallel, and so in a very synergistic way. So, and we kind of think of that as like low tech and high tech, marrying those two together, and not just for our youngest learners. So like Dash and Dot is a wonderful example of that. It's a hands-on, play-based technology tool, but the kids are interacting, they're having conversations, they're creating stories. Like it's just fascinating to watch, and seeing that done so beautifully. And you may have more on that, Brian, too, since that's definitely an area of focus for you.
Well, absolutely. I mean, tangibility and play is a huge part of the early childhood and primary level classrooms. So we see oftentimes the design of the classroom fit these spaces, but as we move into some of the higher grades, we often lose a lot of these tips. We often lose a lot of the flexibility in seating. We lose the creativity in the way the classrooms are designed. So when it comes to some of our higher level teachers who may not have the ability or the ideas for this, because we do, like I said, see a lot of this in the elementary level classrooms. What are some tips that you can give for, obviously these are some great ones, but what are some tips that you can provide for just some of our middle school level classrooms or even high school level classrooms where we see a lot less of this happen? What's a great reason why we should do this for our students?
Well, I mean, our kids are asking for it. I mean, they are craving it. If you're talking about middle school specifically, they're social beings. Like they want opportunities to be social, and it's not just in our classrooms. So we're talking about mobility of learning, and it's not, if we're teachers in one classroom, we can look to other areas within our school, hallways and nooks and outdoor spaces and community spaces. And that's a perfect time to do that with our kids. So if they have mobile devices, you can send them out and do research within the school building. And maybe they're solving problems, and that's another thing is they have that strong sense of justice in middle school. So if they have a task and they're like, okay, I can go solve this problem and find solutions by creating an app or whatever they can do. I think harnessing that piece. Also, they really want choice in any regard. So you talk about having floor space or flexible seating space. Our kids love that. Like they love to have the freedom to sit on the floor. I do too. I mean, like I'm always like, can I please just sit on the floor? But I think so. That would be another thing is use of the environment, capitalize on the social, and give as much choice in any decisions, curricular or otherwise, that you can for these middle school students. And it's just, I mean, it's just best practice. Their bodies are growing and changing, and they need room for that, room and space.
Absolutely.
Honestly, too, when you think about it, as the kids are getting older, middle school and high school, they don't have possibly as many PE courses or recess like they used to when they were younger. And, a long day of sitting in desks, or if that's how the classroom and the school day is, they need chances to stretch their legs, move around. And, if your classroom is set up this way where you have a lot of freedom to move and to be actively involved, you're really going to see them take advantage of that and very much look forward to that. And they really need it. So that's another.
Yeah, we say movement fuels the brain. So movement fuels learning, and that's our goal as teachers. So, well, we could talk on tips for hours.
I know, and there's a lot of great tips that are being shared in the chat room as well. So, yeah.
Also talk to colleagues. Like sometimes we get locked in our little rooms, and the best learning comes right next door. And opportunities to talk to other teachers and say, hey, I have this student, you had him last year, what did you see worked? Or he seems wiggly, or you never know. So having the opportunity to talk to teachers and just reflect is powerful as well.
And to follow people like you who tweet about this stuff on Twitter all the time, so that's a great resource. Searching for learning spaces on Twitter themselves or Pinterest. Teachers are sharing and showing pictures of what they've done in their classrooms with their learning spaces. So you can get some great ideas just by looking on social media, because people are excited and willing to share what they're doing and how they're doing it.
And Instagram too. I mean, all these different social media, we say that's been the best professional development of our entire career. And Instagram is really a natural fit for learning space design because it's visual. So people are sharing pictures and able to get a feedback from other teachers right away. So, and on that, you can, on any of these, you can just use the hashtag learning spaces, and you're going to get amazing ideas right away. So totally agree with that idea.
If we have a couple resources too, we can add them to the chat box.
Or, yeah, we have lots on our website too, and we'll share more. And we did a post last summer, I think, Bri, on learning space design with Wonder Workshop, so we can share that link too.
Yes.
Okay, so I think we're ready. We have Fran's going to share some great stuff on now action steps of putting this all into place. So now we talked about how to reimagine, reinvent, redesign learning spaces. So how does this transform the learning itself? And Fran's going to talk about some action points on what we've seen putting this into play and what we're seeing with a lot of times global classrooms. So you can, I think, you can go ahead and advance.
So for now, to be truly literate within any one discipline, one must possess the ability to create, question, and communicate in multiple formats, including verbally, graphically, digitally, and globally, with the use of many different types of platforms, devices, text, images, and sounds. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, if I can have you go to the next slide. So when you think about extend the classroom, so we're all, within our four walls working with the students, and the students are probably always asking, where is this going to lead to, or how would I need to know this for future, when am I going to use this again? Or, they're always thinking to the future, and we're always thinking, for student outcomes, we want them to be prepared for the future workforce. But there's ways that you can go ahead and think about the ideas that are happening in the classroom where they can actually be making a difference right now. And when you think about the four pillars of global competence, they are investigate the world, recognize perspectives, communicate ideas, and take action. That is a major point. And if you can think about going larger than just, what's in your curriculum, or how can you tie it into things that are happening in the world, especially as we talk about coding and talk about science curriculum. And hopefully the kids are already thinking about ideas that will lead to possible innovations and inventions that will make a difference. So we can talk to them about all this and show them different places that we can do this to inspire change. So let's just go to the next one. So if you extend your classroom walls to the world, how can you do that? Well, we can talk about the power of stories and perspective. We can reason with evidence, and we can talk about creation of content. We'll go to the next slide, please. So the power of stories and perspective. So if you think about how can students share with authentic and diverse audiences? I think we're empowered now with everything with the web and with social media, and us teachers, we have personal learning networks, and you can reach out. There are so many places where you can connect with other teachers in other classrooms where the students can work on whatever piece of work it is, and then also share it with other people or collaborate with other classrooms. And this can happen from little ones as young as kindergarten all the way through higher learning. So one of the things that I think about is, if you bring in Skype, or if you bring in different sites where you can do different projects together. And one of the places that you could look at would be the world's largest lesson. It's a collection of resources provided by UNICEF. And it's basically to promote the message of the Sustainable Development Goals, which are the global goals. They used to be the millennial goals of the United Nations. And we'll, one of our future slides, we can talk about that a little bit more. But the kids, no matter what, let's say, for example, Brian, if you had a classroom in California that was working on, they had a task that had to do with dash and dot. And let's say we had friends in Turkey who were also doing something with dash and dot. You could give them a challenge where both classrooms, and they don't have to be the same age, would try to accomplish, the feat or whatever it is, and with video recording or taking pictures or kids drawing about what happened. And then the teachers could post to something as simple as an interactive corkboard, like Padlet or something. And the students can see the other students learning. So just like Jen had talked about visible learning on the walls or visible learning on the desk, you're doing the same thing, but showing it from classroom to classroom, visible learning on an interactive corkboard, and bringing that up and having your students see other students with cultural names or names sometimes that are the same as their names. And they think, oh my goodness, you know, that person over there in Turkey is doing the same thing we do. And it's just absolutely amazing. Also, and we know this from little ones, when shown a map and when you can go ahead and share perspectives with students in other countries, you know, you never know when, for example, I know a little student who was walking through the airport and saw a map and saw Turkey on the map and thought, hey, I have a friend in Turkey just because their class worked with another class over there. And just, you know, to think about my child feels connected to another person in another country so far away, even though she's never really been there and not seen it, that's quite powerful. Um, Also, talking about how can students demonstrate capacities to recognize perspectives of others. Well, sometimes you'll have instances, for example, where you could see pictures or see video of other classrooms. And the great thing is you'll notice the similarities because they'll still have the same kinds of tools like pencils and paper and desks and possibly computers. But it's the little things on the walls that you look at and you kind of think about this is different. For example, I was a Spanish teacher and we did a project where we traded horror flicks, like a horror skit. But the students at our school created them at their house, and then the students over there, they created it in their homes. And in Spain, for example, they live in, it was typical apartment size and kind of smaller scale. And just, that wasn't the content, but that was something that they realized. Okay, and then let's go to create and build considering geographic, linguistic, and cultural differences. I really hope that people aren't straying away from working with other schools and other places because they think that it's not going to work. A lot of times, we're very lucky that a lot of people speak English, so that can be the language, that can be the main language. But the other thing too is if there's ways to go ahead and put things in writing, then you can use different tools to go ahead to translate the written message. Think about coding. Through coding or through math, it's universal language. So you could use that to communicate ideas or, you know, the main part becomes, you know, looking at that. And also the cultural differences, you know, thinking about the students and again, seeing pictures of other students from around the world and the way possibly they dress or the kids might notice, you know, maybe in a place in the Middle East, it's an all-girl classroom or an all-boy classroom. And if a teacher can point out a little bit of the differences, you can bring in the pieces of culture. If I could have you change slides, please. So how does student work illustrate an ability to investigate the world in matters of global significance? Well, when you think about the students investigating the world, like I had mentioned before, the Sustainable Development Goals, they really, really come into play. I think about goal number 6, which is clean water and sanitation, or maybe it's goal number 5, which is gender equality. And that has a lot to do with access to quality education. There are people all over, and you could be thinking through different coding programs or different, like a dash and dot. They are little characters, so they could accomplish certain things or do certain things that could really be applied also through the global lens of the SDGs. You know, the other thing too is you want the students to make a difference in the world and not just learn about the world. So maybe if they investigate problems in other places and they can communicate and collaborate with learners in other countries, really we are promoting global citizenship and it's quite authentic. Brian, if I can have you slide to the next one. So how can students as creators of content produce digital artifacts that represent creativity and understanding? Even with simple pictures and with coding or anything else, if you just take a picture of what's happening and then use your words to describe what's happening and talk about it, That's amazing. And as well as using, creativity pieces. So let's say it's with the talking in the doing something with coding. You can take that and put it in a creativity piece. The kids could be podcasting about it. The kids could create a video about it. They could even, take a picture of what was happening and then put that into a digital poster that they could create that is, as a mission to be promoting something, and then they can share it all on an interactive site. So, such as Padlet or anything else. So, okay, next slide. So these are just a couple of the ways that you can extend the classroom. But, Jen and I have a resource in our website at calliopeglobal.com where you can read all, we expand much, much more into all these practices and thoughts and pedagogies and, things that you all could do to take action steps that refer to the global goals or cultivate in our students skills like global collaborator or communicator or digital citizen. So I know we're running out of time here, so just wanted to give you a resource that you can go back further and read up on these. So we're running out of time.
That's all right. So if anyone has any questions, you can feel free to drop them into the chat window because I've been going through and I've been pulling a bunch of them out as they've been coming through. There's been a lot of really great collaboration that's been going on. So thank you to everyone who has been, fielding questions, sharing resources, providing links and information. Continue, the wonderful thing about these webinars is the behind the scenes that's happening as we're presenting and seeing all the wonderful conversation that's going through. So hopefully you can continue that online. Make sure you're adding your Twitter handles so we can go through and follow all of you back as well and continue the conversation even after we're done here today. So one of the questions that I have is from Eleanor Evans from Pennsylvania. How do you propose the change in your school district with regards to cost and the budget for your department? And that's referring to the learning spaces. What are some strategies that they could use? Because cost is obviously a major issue for, for pretty much every school. There's always a budget. So what are some recommendations that you have for getting them to create a learning space that is what they're envisioning, but at a lower cost?
So I think, first of all, Bri, and this is a great question from Eleanor, and this is probably one of the #1 questions we all hear. A lot of it's going to be evidencing. So if you have a goal in mind as a teacher and you say, I need, new tables. I know I need this for my students to be successful in their learning. So evidencing that and perhaps doing some action research in your classroom. A lot of it's going to be research also that they can share with administrators and district level decision makers. And as you're going through the process too, another thing, there's 2 points here that I can, and it's kind of more practical examples rather than directly going towards like, how are you going to get your funding? But first of all, we always say with schools, when you're a teacher, get to know your maintenance staff or anyone that knows what back rooms are where there's furniture that people don't want anymore. Because we go into when we go to a school, we're like, that's where we want to go first, and then finding ways to repurpose what is available. So because sometimes the funding just isn't there yet. But if you can say, I took desks out of my classroom, went and found these tables that maybe aren't up to the par where I want them to be, but this is how learning changed over time in my room. So kind of going into those back spaces and using the resources you have available. The second tip that I can tell you, and this is also a practical tip, and it can be about anything really, but specifically if you're looking at something like computer science, and maybe you're not a computer science teacher. I'm not a computer science teacher, but finding a colleague that you can work together with, it's very, very powerful. So for me, as a literacy specialist, pairing with Fran, who is an educational technologist, I was able to bring those ideas and practices into my instruction and it transformed everything. So we weren't necessarily the logical match of who's going to work together, but we found ways to do that. And then of course meeting you, Brian. And so we learn and we feed off of it. And all of a sudden, for you as a teacher, it's really exciting to be able to go to work and do these new wonderful things. So I think that too can play into the evidencing that you can show results to district level people. Brian, I know you work a lot specifically with funding for projects you work on, so you probably have some great points too.
Yeah, I mean, physical spaces, like you mentioned, going out and having the community become a part of your classroom funding. So there's a lot of great resources out there. GoFundMe, there's a lot of different things where you can ask for different furniture. You have to base it on a case and the reason why you want it for your classroom. Pledge Sense is another great one. So there's a lot of really good ones out there that you can go and ask for crowdfunding to be a part of your raising money for your classroom. Something as simple as bake sales or getting the community involved in doing some sort of fundraiser. There's ways around it without having to rely on the district for providing you the funds. You just have to get a little creative. And parents, students, they all want to do what they can because it's impacting their day and it's impacting their child's day. And it's improving the learning process for them and their environment. So just going out and asking for help is a great way to do that. And you can ask from your local community or you can ask the general internet through crowdfunding. So there's a lot of great ways to do that. So yeah, I think like you mentioned, evidence is key because you definitely want to show the reason why it's working, and giving that evidence to the school district or to your principal will obviously result in providing more funds hopefully in the future. So that's a great point. So thank you. Another question that I have here is from Maria from Mexico, is how do you deal with with sharing a classroom with another teacher and designing your space?
Well, okay, so my answer to that, and hi to our friends in Mexico. So this is what we did, is the mindset at our school and what we see in schools is that a space is owned by a teacher. So that's Mrs. Brown's classroom, or that is the humanities room. But what we did to shift that, because we had a lot of shared spaces, is we made it a space for kids. So the students had ownership over every room, and we shifted it from being one teacher's room to being maybe that was a space for Socratic discussions, or that would be a good space for working collaboratively, or whatever it may be. So teachers that are working together, which we have teachers that team teach all the time, or sometimes they're in a room and they're out of a room and they have to be flexible themselves. So if they can look at it as a space for the students first, and then how can they migrate into that equation, that's where we've seen a lot of really great success, because everyone has a different purpose in the space, and they really do. The teachers do, the students do, administrators are going to have different mindsets and ideas. So keeping students at the center of it is always our answer for that.
Wonderful. So that's actually all the questions that we have at this time, but feel free to keep adding them in the chat room, because even after we're done hitting the finish recording button, we'll still hang on for a couple minutes to answer anything that you guys have. So I just want to say thank you to both you and Fran for joining us today. It's been a wonderful conversation, being able to share and collaborate as we always do, and providing everyone with a little bit more information on how learning space design can really take part and change the way classrooms are designed. It looks like the slide's trying to come through. There we go. So here's our contact information. Feel free to reach out to us on Twitter, through email. If you have any additional questions, we're more than happy to answer them for you after we finish this up today. And I want to thank all of you for attending as well. We had it at one point around 170 plus people attending, which is fantastic. It just shows that you as educators want to continue to grow and perfect your talents of changing the lives of children every single day. So thank you again, Fran and Jen, for joining us today. Be sure to visit makewonder.com for information on Dash and Dot, and also visit CalliopeGlobal.com to learn more about the wonderful things that Fran and Jen are working on at Calliope Global. We would also like to thank our sponsor for today, Make Wonder, which is the company that I have the pleasure and privilege of working with every day as educator community manager, where I get to change the lives of teachers through teaching a passion of mine, which is coding and robotics and tangibility in play. And you can learn more by visiting. We're also offering right now an incredible spring sale and special. So be sure to visit our website to learn a little bit more about that also. So you want to visit makewonder.com. Once again, for all of you attending, you will be receiving within the next business day the certificate of completion for attending. So those continuing education credits are going to be useful to all of you. If you are watching this as a recording, you're going to be able to take the quiz immediately following watching this, which is at edweb.net/code. And also, once again, be sure to join our community. You can continue the conversation every day as we post different ideas, resources, conversational topics on computer science and coding in the K-8 classroom. You can continue to watch back some of the webinars that we do and watch and learn about our invitations for our upcoming webinars that we hold each and every month. With that said, we're going to go ahead and we can stop the recording. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. And be sure to reach out to us with any additional questions. We're going to hang tight and on here for the next couple of minutes and answer any additional questions that may flow through.